Good morning, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the 4th International Conference on Action with Women and Peace. It is indeed an honor to be greeting you this morning, and thank you once again for all of your attendances. My name is Ju-Yeon Cho, and it is an honor to be your host for today. Allow me to greet you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Hosted by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Korea, the conference today will consist of the opening session and session 1 in the morning. And then in the afternoon, we will move on to session 2, the youth session, and the closing session. The first session will hone in on the lessons learned from the Asian approach on women, peace, and security. And then on session 2, we will focus on Afghanistan and the rights of women and girls in the region. And then in the youth session, we will look at the perspectives of 19 to 34-year-olds from all over the world who will contemplate women, peace, and security issues through the 2022 Global Youth Video Competition. And today, our conference is being streamed live online on our YouTube channel as well. So thank you once again to our online audiences joining in today. Then without further ado, let us begin our opening session. It will be divided into 2 parts, and we will have a photo session for our speakers, panelists, advisory committee members, and ambassadors to Korea after the first part. And then afterwards, we will continue on with the second part. So starting off with our opening session, please allow me to invite His Excellency, Mr. Park Jin, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Korea, who will deliver his welcoming remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome him with a big round of applause.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Park Jin, Foreign Minister. I welcome all of you to this important and very timely conference this morning. Mr. Volker, Türk, United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, Dr. Denis Mukwege, 2018 Nobel Peace Prize Laureate, Dr. Hyunsook, Minister of Gender, Equality and Family, distinguished ambassadors from UAE, Italy, Singapore, Oman, Israel, Australia, Saudi Arabia, Ghana, Sweden, Switzerland, Algeria, Portugal, Slovenia, DR Congo, Laos, Georgia, Zambia, Colombia, Mongolia, and other distinguished guests. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm pleased to welcome you to the 4th International Conference on Action with Women and Peace. I would like to thank all of you for joining us today. I also wish to thank the Center for Humanitarian Dialogue for partnering with us in convening this conference. Today we meet at a time of escalating conflicts and crises. As is so often the case, women and girls bear the brunt of the impact. We continue to hear horrific stories of conflict-related sexual violence, as well as women's voices being silenced around the world. We also hear stories of heroic women risking death and torture to speak out against injustice and uphold women's rights in the face of bombs and bullets. I believe it is our moral imperative that we come together to support these women. And this is the very spirit enshrined in UN Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace, and security. This landmark resolution recognizes women not only as victims of conflicts, but also as critical actors in sustaining peace. As former Secretary General Ban Ki-moon said, Sustainable peace is possible only with women's full participation. Their perspectives, their leadership, their daily equal presence wherever we seek to make and keep the peace. In fact, growing research shows that women's engagement in peace processes increases the chances of lasting peace. And women are more likely to silence the guns and promote a culture of peace. It is in this context that today's conference aims to shine a spotlight on the women in Asia who are on the front lines fighting for peace. These courageous women will be sharing their experiences and insights in leading peace processes in the region. We will also hear from those who continue to raise their voices to address conflict-related sexual violence. A separate session dedicated to the women and girls in Afghanistan will also be held. It is with a heavy heart that we watch the tragic events unfolding to some 20 million Afghan women and girls as their fundamental rights, including access to education, are being denied. Their voices, at the same time, are being drowned out by other global crises. This conference seeks to bring the attention back to Afghanistan. I hope their stories will instill a sense of urgency and in turn galvanize us towards greater action. As for Korea, in our aspiration to become a global pivotal state, we will remain a strong advocate for the rights and dignity of women across the globe. Through our action with Women and Peace initiative, we will provide a global platform to lend a voice to the voiceless while mobilizing the political support to translate the Women, Peace and Security WPS agenda into action. We will also increase our humanitarian and development assistance to support women and girls in conflict situations. And should Korea be elected as a UN Security Council member for the term 2024 to 25, we hope to carry the torch in placing the WPS agenda at the forefront of the Council's efforts to maintain peace. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished ambassadors, I wish to conclude my remarks by congratulating the winners of the Global Youth Video Competition, especially Ms. Vanessa Azara from Indonesia, who won first prize with her passionate entry and is here with us today. History shows that no matter how serious are the challenges, the idealism, the drive, and the passion of the young have given us hope. Our youth are the architects of our future, and their hopes and inputs will light the way forward. Therefore, engaging the youth on the WPS agenda is our best hope for a peaceful future. Once again, thank you all for coming to Korea and participating in the conference to share your stories and insights. I wish everyone a fruitful and engaging discussion. Thank you. 감사합니다.
Thank you very much, Minister Park, for opening the 4th International Conference on Action with Women and Peace. And thank you once again for your leadership. And now it is time for us to move on to our keynote speeches, ladies and gentlemen. First, Mr. Volker Türk, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Mr. Denis Mukwege, the Nobel Peace Prize laureate, and Her Excellency Ms. Kim Hyunsook, the Minister of Gender Equality and Family of the Republic of Korea, have sent their speech through videos. So, ladies and gentlemen, please turn your attention to the screen.
Distinguished delegates and participants, during my visit to Sudan last month, I met with a brave woman from a grassroots civil society organization who conveyed in graphic terms the impact of the conflict on women and girls. She spoke about instances of assault and sexual and gender-based violence, trafficking, discrimination, women's profound care responsibilities for children and family members during conflict, and a lack of access to essential services. Despite this, very few women are included in the discussions on peace and the future of their country. This is not a challenge unique to Sudan. Around the world, women are being impacted by conflict while at the same time being excluded from formal peace processes. For example, between 1992 and 2019, only 6% of mediators and 13% of negotiators were women. Women peace builders and women human rights defenders play critical roles before, during, and after conflicts. As community organizers, they have important insights into subtle shifts that may indicate an escalation of violence in communities. When the voices of women are silenced or ignored, early warning signs of conflict may be overlooked. During a conflict, women human rights defenders document attacks and violations. They assist victims and their families and communities. They identify the needs of women and marginalized groups, and so much more. They are on the front line of the humanitarian response. Following a conflict, women human rights defenders can help shape institutions that are responsive to the needs of the population. The role of women in these processes is obvious. However, political rhetoric on women and girls in statements, resolutions, and policy documents rarely translates into action. We really must act now to ensure the equal and meaningful participation of women at all levels of decision-making in peace-building processes. And more broadly, we must recognize that ensuring women's human rights and gender equality are a cornerstone of sustainable and genuine peace. In situations of conflict, as in peacetime, securing women's rights means securing human rights for all.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for giving me an opportunity to speak at this gathering of so many states, civil society members, humanitarians, and most of all survivor activists dedicated to ending what has become an all too common strategy, weapon of war, sexual violence. It has been nearly 23 years since the UN adopted the resolution 1325 recognizing women not merely as victims, but also recognizing them as agents of change. Unfortunately, while this resolution 1325 was seen as a major step forward for progress, it has not been implemented as expected. Women, let alone women survivors, still only represent 26% of parliamentarians and 22% of ministers in the world. And the women's participation in UN-led or co-led peace process in 2021 amounted to only 18%. It is crystal clear that we are not moving on the right direction, and there is so much room for gaining change. We know, ladies and gentlemen, that including women in peace negotiations increase the chance of peace agreement lasting longer by at least 20%, and in some cases, 35%. So why do we still excluding them? Why are we still not using the added value of women and the women survivors to head more committees, sit at more councils, and lead in peace negotiations? Ladies and gentlemen, if women in general are still marginalized in political transition and peace process, this is even more true for survivors of conflict-related sexual violence. Yet Resolution 2467 encourages states to adopt a survivor-centered approach to preventing and responding to sexual violence, which includes to invite them to the negotiating table. It is with this objective in mind that at the Global Survivors Fund, of which the Republic of Korea is a board member, we are advocating for the holistic care model developed for the last 20 years at Panzi in the Democratic Republic of Congo, which includes medical, surgical, psychosocial, socioeconomic, and legal support to be considered a human right to rehabilitation for survivors of conflict-related sexual violence worldwide. Therefore, we work with survivors in identifying their needs, and the form of reparations should take, as no one knows better than them what they need. In addition, we press states and other duty bearers to meet their obligation of providing quality holistic care and reparations to survivors, which is not only their right but also a prerequisite to allow them to fully act as key agents of security, justice, and lasting peace. Ladies and gentlemen, allow us to reaffirm today the urgent need to galvanize political will, to translate words in action, and to ensure women and survivors have a seat at the table at every opportunity where programs affecting them are being decided and transitional justice mechanisms and peace deals are being negotiated. Women will be part of the solution. The time has come for the male elites to understand this and to change the paradigm for the benefit of all. Now is the time for meaningful action to actively embrace and execute the UN Women, Peace and Security agenda. Women will be part of the solution. Together, peace is possible. It's the only path. Thank you.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, I'm Kim Hyunsook, Minister of Gender Equality and Family. Please allow me to extend my sincere congratulations on the hosting of the first International Conference on Action with Women and Peace. And I would like to thank Foreign Minister Park Jin for organizing this meaningful event. In the post-Cold War era, peace is no longer narrowly defined as the state of no war. Instead, the meaning extends over the passive meaning to include safety in our life world or human security. To Korea, the only divided nation in the world with an armistice in place for extended period of time, peace is a pivotal value of significant importance. Toward peace building on the Korean Peninsula and Asia, the Korean government and civil societies have worked steadily together and made remarkable advances. On our path toward peace, women have played an important role, and their roles must be increased. Since the adoption of the UN Security Council Resolution 1325 in 2000, the international community has stressed the importance of the participation of women in the peace process as a pivotal pillar of building an enduring peace. To implement the resolution, 96 countries across the world have devised and implemented the national action plans. Korea is no exception. The Korean government established its first NAP in 2014 and the third plan in 2021. Under the national plan, 10 ministries with the Ministry of Gender Equality and Family playing a leading role have developed concrete tasks and implemented them in the 5 areas of prevention, participation, protection, relief, and recovery and monitoring. Under this plan, we have enhanced women's participation in national defense, foreign affairs, peace unification and public safety, For example, by raising the proportion of female officers in the military and police. In addition, it provides stronger support for victims of sexual violence during conflict and works to bring justice to perpetrators. In a continued effort for the recovery of victims of sexual violence, the Korean government assists the stable livelihoods of the Japanese military, comfort women victims, and carries out commemorative projects. Furthermore, it is increasing international development cooperation with women, peace, and security agenda as part of its effort to enhance women's participation in the peace process while making policy effort for violence prevention and victims protection and gender mainstreaming. Women's participation as a major actor in conflict resolution and peace building is an essential element in achieving sustainable peace. I hope today's conference will serve as a meaningful opportunity to discuss sexual violence during conflict and the WPS agenda in depth and explore women's active roles in peace building. I wish all of the participants the best of health and happiness. Thank you.
Thank you once again for your valuable keynote speeches. Ladies and gentlemen, please give our three speakers another big round of applause. Thank you very much. And now we will proceed with our photo session, but please allow us a little bit of time to clear the stage. And in the meantime, I would like to just give you some housekeeping announcements about our photo session. We will take two different photo sessions. First, we will have all of our distinguished guests come up to the stage with your masks on. And then we will proceed with one photo session. And then afterwards, we will all take our masks off and then have the second group photo. So now we are almost ready with clearing the stage. So please refer to the guidance of our staff and join us up on stage one by one. And because we do have steps, please mind your steps as well. Photos will be taken with our masks on. For the first photo, please, a gentle reminder. And now I would like to invite all of our distinguished guests up onto the stage for our photo session. Please join us. And now, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce Undersecretary of State Ho Nirmita of the Ministry of Women's Affairs from the Kingdom of Cambodia. Please welcome her with a warm round of applause.
His Excellency Park Jin, Minister of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Republic of Korea. His Excellency Kim Hyunsook, Minister of Gender Equality and Family, Republic of Korea. Her Excellency Lee Sin-hwa, Ambassador at Large on the North Human Rights. Her Excellency Christine Klatz, Ambassador for Women and Girls, Commonwealth of Australia. His Excellency Christina Fatowat, Senior Officer of the Secretary of State in the Office of Global Women Issues, U.S. Department of State. Dr. Volker, UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. Dr. Denis Mukwege, Nobel Peace Prize Laureate. Distinguished guests, Ambassador, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I am delighted to see you all today for the 4th International Conference on Action with Women and Peace at the beautiful city of Seoul, Republic of Korea. Allow me to take this opportunity to express my sincere appreciation to Excellency Park Jin, Minister of the Ministry of Women's Affairs, Republic of Korea, for your warm hospitality and excellent arrangement for this auspicious gathering after long postponement due to the traveling and health restrictions caused by COVID-19 pandemic. This year has been a very active year for Cambodia, as we are taking on the role of the ASEAN chair and have hosted the 40th and 41st ASEAN and related summits. The ASEAN and related summit has been successfully concluded with the over 70 outcome document and declaration adopted and note, in addition to providing bilateral and multilateral platform for ASEAN member states and dialogue partners to commit to address the common and very challenges together while upholding the ASEAN centrality and unity. The year 2022 also marked the first year of Cambodia to completely reopen our country after upholding the COVID-19 restriction and containment measures to ensure the best outcome for the economic and public health recovery of Cambodia. The physical organization of the summit has been made possible by effective control and containment of the spread of COVID-19 pandemic under the visionary leadership of Samdech Akia Mahasenat Padaitecho Hun Sen, Prime Minister of the Kingdom of Cambodia. This milestone achievement is of utmost relevance to the implementation of the ASEAN ongoing effort in developing the regional plan of action on women, peace and security, which was adopted by the ASEAN leader at the 40th and 41st ASEAN Summit and was officially launched last 2 weeks in Cambodia. We are pleased that the 4th International Conference also aims to complement these regional endeavors by contributing operational and assistance on the subject matter that is of the relevant and timely manner for the regions. This conference is envisaged to support ASEAN in addressing gender harm experienced by women and girls in humanitarian settings through the lens of women, peace, and security. It will further enhance the implementation of the ASEAN Regional Plan of Action on Women and Peace and Security by promoting additional and comprehensive integration of implementation humanitarian law as a component of the OPA on the Women, Peace and Security implementation. Gender has been institutionalized through our governmental structure, and it's the key essence of the UNSCR 1325 on Women, Peace and Security that has been consistently implemented through the focusing on 4 pillars, which are women participate in all levels of decision-making in the peace and security, promotion of the rights of women and girls, incorporation of a gender perspective into conflict prevention initiative, and ensure that gender considerations are integrated into release and recovery efforts. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, ASEAN continues to adopt a whole of ASEAN approach to comprehensive pursue women, peace and security across the 3 ASEAN community pillars, with a strong commitment to engage multiple stakeholders to mobilize collective action. In particular, women organizations are substantively and meaningfully engaged in the advancing the women, peace and security agenda in ASEAN and in the implementation of the regional plan of action. ASEAN have embraced a broad framing of women, peace and security, which, as we have seen, has moved beyond traditional security issues. Being integrally linked with poverty, women with gender inequality intersect with migration and impacting environmental degradation. The regional plan of action covers humanitarian settings brought by disaster, climate change, and the COVID-19 pandemic. It likewise future prevention approaches, including women economic empowerment and the promotion of culture of peace with increased women engagement in disaster risk reduction, emergency response, to engaging the digital economy, ensuring cybersecurity, and preventing violent extremism, among others. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the ASEAN Commission for Promotion and Protection for Women and Children remains the steadfast and committed in advancing gender equality and employment of all women and girls. In keeping with our mandate, the ACWC will continue to lead, support, and work closely with the ASEAN Committee on Women and other relevant ASEAN bodies, entities, and partners to demonstrate our immense effort in supporting the women, peace and security agenda from a wide range and perspective, including policy, advocacy, intersectoral dialogues, and capacity building activity at regional and national level. In closing, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to congratulate to all of us here today, continuing this important dialogue. Now, it is for international for further support humanitarian and development projects aiding women and girls in conflict, as well as advancing global discourse and address the complexity of women, peace and security as it ties into conflict-related violence. This important dialogue bridges the previous discuss and enable us one step closer realizing our goal that place women key roles and their meaningful participation to respond to security threats and challenges with no women left behind. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Undersecretary Nirmita, for your kind remarks. Thank you very much for your words. And thank you for traveling to be here with us today. And next, ladies and gentlemen, it is time to welcome Deputy Minister Leni Rosalind for Gender Equality of Indonesia's Ministry of Women's Empowerment and Child Protection. And she is joining us live on Zoom today, so we will check whether she is online and can hear us well. So Deputy Minister Leni Rosalind, can you hear me?
Yes, I could hear you clearly. Thank you.
Thank you very much for joining in and logging on. So please give us your words. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome her with a big round of applause.
Yeah, thank you very much. His Excellency, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Korea, Her Excellency, Minister of Gender Equality and Family of the Republic of Korea, all keynote speakers, resource persons, ladies and gentlemen, good morning from Jakarta. Thank you for this opportunity to speak. Let me start by congratulating the government of the Republic of Korea, especially the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, for organizing the 4th International Conference on Action with Women and Peace. This is indeed an important venue to take stock and reflect on our key learnings on action with women and peace. I would also like to express gratitude for inviting Indonesia to share our views. It was during the terms of Indonesia as ASEAN Committee on Women Chair that the process of developing the ASEAN Regional Plan of Action on Women, Peace and Security. And as current chair of the ASEAN Ministerial Meeting on Women and chair of ASEAN in 2023, Indonesia will continue our commitment to implementing the ASEAN Regional Plan of Action on Women, Peace and Security, both at regional as well as at national levels. Ladies and gentlemen, please allow me now to share some reflections, especially related to the initiatives done by the ASEAN Committee on Women. First, the key strength of the ASEAN Regional Plan of Action is that it was developed through consultative process that involve ASEAN sectoral bodies, civil society organizations, and stakeholders. Such process enriched the plan of action and grounded it in the ASEAN context. Moreover, the outlined outcomes and actions are in line with the structures and processes of ASEAN at the regional level and sensitive to national realities. Second, there is still room to engage more stakeholders at the national and regional levels. Stakeholders' engagement is key in localizing the implementations of the plan of action. Such engagements also need to happen between and among ministries and national agencies who carry the mandates on women, peace, and security. The defense and security sectors need to work with the national women's machineries in each ASEAN member state. These interactions can then be elevated to foster greater cross-sectoral cooperation at the regional level as well as at the national levels. Third, it is essential that more women's organizations are engaged in the implementations of the plan of action. Throughout this process, it is imperative that women occupy a seat at the decision-making tables. Ladies and gentlemen, in the case of Indonesia, the government of Indonesia is committed to achieving gender equality and the empowerment of all women as mandated in our regulations. Recognizing that women are agents of change and catalysts to sustain peace, foster prosperity, and safeguard social cohesion, strengthening effective mechanisms to promote this agenda becomes an increasingly important task for Indonesia. We are committed to the pivotal roles that women play in peace building, conflict prevention, resolutions, and recovery. With the rank of 100 based on WPS Index 2021, there will be more efforts needed to ensure the integrations of women, peace, and securities into our national and subnational policies, programs, activities, as well as frameworks across the country. We will continue our efforts in promoting women, peace, and security agenda from a wide range of perspectives, including policy advocacy, interministries and regions dialogue, as well as training and capacity building activities. NGO in Indonesia have done good practices on, among others, women as leaders in peace mission, preventive action by women, women protection, women participation, relief and recovery. All efforts done by the government of Indonesia are in line with our national vision of an inclusive community that promotes high quality of life, provides equitable access to opportunities for all, and supports the protection of human rights. The United Nations Security Council adopted Resolution 1925, recognizing WPS as a key part of the international agenda as well as our Indonesia agenda. Ladies and gentlemen, as the chair of ASEAN in 2023, of course, Indonesia will continue working on this WPS agenda as one of priorities and potential deliverables to ensure gender equality and empowerment of women towards realizing a caring, prosperous, and sustainable Indonesia community. Our focus will be on prevention, protection, participation, and recovery. I do hope that these points contributed to our discussion this morning. And again, it is with much hope and optimism that Indonesia affirms our commitment to support the implementation of the agenda, Women, Peace, and Security. We also affirm our commitment to do more actions on women and peace in the regions as well as in the national and subnational levels. Let us continue to work for peace together. I thank you.
Thank you very much for your speech, Deputy Minister, and for your contributions, for valuable contributions. Thank you very much. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we have Ambassador Christine Clark for Women and Girls of the Commonwealth of Australia, and Ms. Katrina Forovat, the Senior Official to the Secretary of State in the Office of Global Women's Issues of the United States Department of State, who have kindly sent us their speeches through a video. Once again, please direct your attention to the screen.
Hello. My name is Christine Clark and I'm Australia's Ambassador for Women and Girls. I'm pleased to record this message for the International Conference on Action with Women and Peace. Amidst conflict and deteriorating security environments, humanitarian crises, climate change and other contemporary challenges, implementation of the Women, Peace and Security Agenda is a pressing priority. The WPS agenda can and should be a cornerstone of our efforts for peace, prosperity and stability. In this endeavour, national action plans are instrumental because they assist countries to take concrete actions, monitor progress, learn and adapt. Australia released our second 10-year National Action Plan in April last year. One of the 4 outcomes is reducing sexual and gender-based violence. Sexual and gender-based violence is not an inevitable consequence of conflict and crises. It is important that we understand, respond to, and eliminate all forms of violence. Our responses must be survivor-centred, age and gender responsive, and comprehensive. It is encouraging to see global attention to this WPS pillar and human rights abuse. In September, and with Japan's and Sierra Leone's leadership, the General Assembly adopted a resolution on international cooperation for access to justice, remedies and assistance for survivors of sexual violence. Then last month, the world convened in London for the International Conference on Preventing Sexual Violence in Conflict. Australia, like the Republic of Korea and 52 other countries, endorsed the political declaration. In doing so, we agreed to accelerate action to end conflict-related sexual violence, hold those responsible to account, end the existing culture of impunity, and provide more comprehensive support to survivors. SGBV is one pillar of the WPS agenda. As being addressed at this conference, action is also needed on all pillars, with more women in leadership roles across peace processes and the security sector, protecting and fulfilling women's and girls' human rights, and ensuring relief and recovery is responsive to diverse needs and priorities. Working concertatively and collaboratively, I am sure we can strengthen implementation of the WPS agenda. I wish you a constructive conference.
Thank you to Minister Park Jin and the Republic of Korea for both the invitation to this conference and the opportunity to discuss the current situation of WPS and the status of women in conflict. I cannot overstate the importance of including women in leadership roles and the decision-making spaces in a meaningful and consistent way. I'm delighted there is an opening and ongoing discussion regarding this issue in the Republic of Korea. As the senior official and acting ambassador for the Secretary's Office of Global Women's Issues at the U.S. Department of State, supporting inclusion and efforts of women mediators, leaders, and human rights defenders is one of my greatest honors. This is particularly relevant as women around the world are disproportionately impacted by the issues such as existing and emerging conflicts, gender-based violence, which includes conflict-related sexual violence, climate change, and other crises. The United States recognizes women, peace, and security as both a foreign policy and national security priority. We know that when women are fully and meaningfully included in all sectors of life, we are all safer, more secure, and better for it. However daunting, women consistently rise to the occasion and are leaders in promoting peace, justice, security, and human rights for all, often at great personal or professional risk and unimaginable sacrifice to themselves and their families. Women hold immense capacity to contribute meaningfully to peace and security, and the United States will continue to advocate for their input into the leadership in negotiations around the world. The United States recognizes the unique ways women contribute to all sectors of life, and how the pillars of women, peace, and security are imperative to reducing poverty, promoting stability, and fostering strong partnerships towards a sustainable peace and future. To that end, we strive to ensure that gender equity and equality continues to play a role in our national security strategy. And I would like to share just a few specific examples. I was so honored to be in Seoul in September, and when I was there, I met with colleagues at the Ministry of Gender Equality and Family, as well as the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, on important issues like gender-based violence, women's economic empowerment, and of course, WPS issues. Additionally, I was delighted to give remarks at the International Forum on Work and Care Convergence, hosted by the Seoul Foundation of Women and Family. I was encouraged by the strong attendance from the international community and the chance to highlight care issues and the impact they have on the lives of women and girls around the world. The U.S. values our partnership with the Republic of Korea, particularly related to women's leadership and empowerment. My recent visit and this conference with so many world leaders participating are examples of the power of fostering connections and leadership in building WPS connections. We are also so grateful for the Republic of Korea's work with us to address gender-based violence, including as members of the Global Partnership for Action on Gender-Based Online Harassment and Abuse. Recently, that global partnership issued a joint statement on the leadership of Iranian women and girls as they stand up and speak out for their basic rights, and how they do so courageously despite the violent backlash, including gender-based violence perpetrated in online spaces. We thank our Republic of Korea counterparts for their contributions and support of this effort to advance our shared principles, and for Minister Park's signature on this statement. I recently attended the UK's Preventing Sexual Violence in Conflict Initiative International Conference in November, and joined a number of survivors and advocates in a panel discussing on preventing sexual violence and the WPS agenda. It is clear much work remains to be done to prevent and respond to conflict-related sexual violence and to end impunity for perpetrators. President Biden recently signed a presidential memorandum on promoting accountability for conflict-related sexual violence to strengthen the US government's efforts to combat CRSV. It aims to leverage sanctions authorities, security assistance restrictions, visa ineligibilities, and other tools to promote accountability, ensures acts of CRSV are given equal consideration alongside other serious human rights abuses in developing designations under existing authorities, and continues to build a coalition of like-minded nations and international organizations to do the same. At the same time, we are well aware that justice includes accountability, but cannot be limited to just criminal accountability alone. To further our survivor-centered approach, we are continuing to also support access to services, support for survivor-led and centered advocacy, and support for communities to determine the best ways to reach justice related to CRSV. As the penholder on this issue in the UN Security Council, the US is proud of our long-standing legacy as a champion for CRSV prevention and response. And we continue to see this as a fundamental pillar of our global gender-based violence work. It is critical that any response to CRSV and other forms of gender-based violence be delivered through a survivor-centered, trauma-informed approach and supported by international leadership to ensure survivors have access to the comprehensive resources that they need. The best long-term prevention of conflict-related sexual violence is building societies that advance respect for human rights and equal protection under the law, full access to education, economic opportunities, and healthcare, and that treat all individuals with the dignity they deserve. I want to close out my remarks with a final note on the importance of women's leadership in peace talks, mediation, and peace processes. As reported by the Council on Foreign Relations, between 1992 and 2019, women represented, on average, only 13% of negotiators, 6% of mediators, and 6% of signatories in major peace processes around the world. That is abysmal, and frankly, a recipe for instability and conflict, because as we know, peace agreements that involve women-led or gendered responsive civil society organizations are 64% less likely to fail. I want to emphasize that the point of including women in peace negotiations is not just because women are inherently more peaceful, but because women experience conflict and instability in unique ways, and therefore bring unique perspectives to resolving conflict and are more effective. More importantly, all those involved must recognize the reason behind women's participation and the need to define norms and traditions that propagate instability and insecurity. After all, peace negotiations are often rooted in the defiance of previously existing societal norms, which embraced exclusion and inequitable power dynamics. The meaningful inclusion of women in peace negotiations is one more step forward towards inclusion and change in the hope for and pursuit of a better future for all. Thank you so much again for the opportunity to speak at this conference. I look forward to hearing from the other keynote speakers and learning from the rest of the panels. Thank you.
Thank you once again for your insightful speeches. And next, we also have another speech from Ambassador Lee Xin-hwa for International Cooperation on North Korean Human Rights. Ambassador Lee is also joining us live on Zoom. I believe that she is currently logged on online. So let us see if she can hear us very well and clearly. Ambassador Lee, can you hear us?
Thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us. And if you can hear us well, please, ladies and gentlemen, please give her a big round of applause.
Honorable Minister of Foreign Affairs Park Jin, Honorable Minister of Gender Equality and Family Kim Hyunsook, and Honorable UN High Commissioner for Human Rights Volker Türk, all distinguished keynote speakers, Excellencies, distinguished guests, and ladies and gentlemen, good morning. This is Xin-hwa Lee, Ambassador of International Cooperation on North Korean Human Rights, and I'm very pleased and privileged to join, although online, the opening session of the International Conference on Action with Women and Peace. I understand this meaningful international event is being held for its fourth time this year, continuing to enrich the global discourses and actively seek international partnership on the women, peace, and security agenda. Having heard this keynote speaker sessions from 10 o'clock today, I'm particularly pleased to see the conference will be incorporating the youth session, raising awareness of the pressing issue for next generation peace advocator and peace practitioners. It is also noteworthy that there have also been efforts to interconnect the discussion with humanitarian and development interventions. And yet we are still witnessing an evident devastating gap between norms and the reality on the ground. Conflicts have a profoundly negatively and disproportionate impact on women and girls. In the wake of the unfolding conflict around the world now, women and girls are now faced with deepening challenges. In wartime, women often take the sole responsibility and risk of protecting their children and themselves from dangerous situations such as killing and sexual or physical violence. Also, please note that according to UN High Commissioner for Refugees, more than half of the world's total 80 million displaced people are women and children. This calls for our redoubled efforts to counter conflict-related sexual violence, increase women's participation in peace processes, and more in general, protect and promote women and girls' human rights. Let me take this opportunity as an ambassador for international cooperation on North Korean human rights to bring your special attention to this dire situation of women and girls in North Korea. Of course, the human rights of both men and women in North Korea is gravely abused in terms of right to food, right to information, freedom of speech, freedom of movement, and so on. Arbitrary execution and extrajudicial killings by the regime continue in North Korea, despite the concern and the calls for correction by the international community. In particular, as UN human rights mechanism have pointed out, there are specific human rights gaps North Korean women and girls face, such as unequal access to employment, discriminatory laws and regulations, and minimal access to sexual and reproductive health service for women. These conditions have forced North Korean women and girls to leave the country. More than 70% of over 33,000 North Korean refugees who made it to Korea are female. Both in the process, in the process, they become extremely vulnerable to human trafficking, forced labor, forced marriage, or even sexual violence. Korea's third National Action Plan for the implementation of the UN Security Council Resolution 1325 includes plans to support women defectors from North Korea. Please record Resolution 1325 is the first landmark Security Council resolution on women, peace, and security in 2000, which rightly addresses the impact of a war on women, the importance of women's full and equal participation in conflict resolution, peacekeeping, peace building, and post-conflict social reconstruction. Our Yoon government is committed to prevent violence against women and girls, provide support for their self-reliance, and take measures to safeguard their human rights. Unfortunately, however, the women and girls locked up in North Korea largely remain unheard. It is my heartfelt wish to be able to discuss with North Korean women and girls face-to-face human rights issues as well as the matters of peace and security on the Korean Peninsula. Indeed, the Women, Peace and Security agenda should be implemented on the Korean Peninsula on a personal and on a fuller scale. Until such a time comes, ladies and gentlemen, I will do my part to promote and protect human rights of women and girls in North Korea with a firm belief that there will be no genuine peace devoid of women's human rights. Through continued international cooperation compromising the public, private, and academic sectors, we must raise our voices and take firm actions to improve the human rights of North Korea, ordinary people, particularly most vulnerable groups like women and girls. These efforts will ultimately lay the foundation for lasting peace on the Korean Peninsula and East Asia and beyond in the world. In this regard, I'd like to sincerely congratulate and send great support for the holding of this important international conference on action with women and peace, which marks its 4th anniversary. My apology not to be able to be with you because today is the last day of the undergraduate class and graduate seminar. But I wish you a successful meeting that will lead to many useful and meaningful discussion and discourses today. Thank you very much.
Thank you once again, Ambassador Lee, for your kind remarks, your thought-provoking messages as well. With this, ladies and gentlemen, we will conclude our opening session for our conference. Thank you very much once again for all of your attendance. We will now take a short break and we will resume with our first session. Our first session will be lessons learned from an Asian approach to women, peace, and security. So please feel free to take a short break, but please be back to start session 1. Thank you very much. So good morning once again, ladies and gentlemen. I'm your host, Chu-Yeon Cho, and let us begin our first session titled Lessons Learned from the Asian Approach to Women, Peace, and Security. And on stage, we have our moderator as well as our 6 panelists who will share their insights. Thank you once again for joining us. But session 1 will kick off with a keynote speech and continue on with the panel discussions until lunchtime. So now I would like to introduce Mr. Ramesh Rajasingam, the Director of the Coordination Division at the UN OCHA, as our keynote speaker. He has sent us his speech through a video. So first and foremost, please turn your attention to the screen.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, October 2022 marked 22 years since the adoption of UN Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace and security. This resolution for the first time recognized the crucial importance of women's full, equal and meaningful participation and their key contributions to peace. The WPS agenda continues to be critical in our efforts to strengthen gender equality in peace-building and humanitarian action, and it is an imperative in OCHA's role in coordination. I therefore want to focus my remarks on what OCHA and our humanitarian partners are doing to advance the WPS agenda in humanitarian settings, to give you some insight into how we are supporting this important work. Let me first turn to the key pillar of participation. We know meaningful participation and leadership of local women and local women's organizations is critical in the shaping of sustained peace and humanitarian action, planning and response. So what are we humanitarians doing to help move the needle on this? In the Asia and Pacific region, the large majority, in fact 89% of humanitarian planning processes directly involve local women-focused organizations. In Afghanistan, the humanitarian country team established an Afghan Women's Advisory Group to provide guidance and advice to the HCT in facilitating more context-specific and locally anchored engagement. This ensures women and girls' rights remain comprehensively integrated in humanitarian assistance. In Myanmar, we currently have a total of 12 capacity building activities benefiting over 400 individuals, 2/3 of whom are female, across 284 organizations, including 137 women's organizations. The Myanmar Humanitarian Fund also has enhanced its collaboration with the recently established Women's Peace and Humanitarian Fund to reinforce the institutional and response capacity of women's organizations across the humanitarian response. And in the Philippines and in Pakistan, OCHA immediately deployed gender expertise through the GenCap capacity project to support the humanitarian responses to the typhoon and floods respectively. Humanitarians have been actively working on ensuring robust gender analysis, including ensuring sex and age disaggregated data and gender mainstreaming throughout the responses. And in Afghanistan, Lebanon, Somalia, Ethiopia, Sudan, and Ukraine, local women's organizations are currently represented on the respective humanitarian funds advisory board. The second area that has been a key focus for us relates to the WPS protection pillar. OCHA continues to strengthen advocacy and resource mobilization to GBV, gender equality, and the empowerment of women and girls in humanitarian response. This is in line with our commitments to the call to action on protection from GBV in emergencies and those made in Oslo on ending SGBV in humanitarian crises. Globally, and this will not be news to you, 1 in 3 women experience violence during their lifetime. In some humanitarian emergencies, however, more than 70% of women have experienced a form of GBV, and an estimated 1 in 5 displaced women will experience sexual violence. These catastrophic numbers and the increased risk of GBV in conflict and humanitarian settings threatens the lives of millions of women and girls, as well as global progress towards gender equality. In this regard, the chronic shortfall in funding for gender and GBV programming remains a serious challenge to the international community's commitments under the WPS agenda. OCHA is actively working to rectify the underfunding of GBV services through increased prioritization and humanitarian funding allocations. To support women-led organizations in their work on GBV prevention, mitigation, and response, OCHA released a novel joint allocation of $25 million SURF funding to address GBV, with an allocation of $17 million to UNFPA and $8 million to UN Women, where there are at least 30%, and in some cases up to 50% of the funding was channeled to women-led organizations working on GBV, including in Afghanistan, Bangladesh, and Myanmar. In Myanmar, the Myanmar Humanitarian Fund allocated $1.4 million in 2021 to promote the participation of affected people, with examples including the establishment of complaint and feedback mechanisms and awareness sessions in IDP camps, and capacity building trainings related to GBV, PSEA, and disability inclusion. $255,000 were directly allocated to GBV awareness, benefiting a total of 45,000 women. In 2022, GBV was a component for 76% of SURF projects in the Asia-Pacific region. And in 2021, SURF allocated $372 million, or 70% of total SURF funding, to projects with a gender equality component, a significant increase from 63% in 2020. But please don't be fooled. Despite these increased efforts and some progress, humanitarian operations, peacekeeping, and peace-building missions are still far behind in ensuring local women and local women's organizations are consistently part of the decision-making at all levels. Women's participation remains insufficient in formal peace processes, humanitarian coordination, and strategic decision-making spaces at all levels. I therefore want to leave you with 3 key messages for your consideration. 1. It is not enough to protect women, but we must listen to them and follow their leadership. 2. Women cannot fully empower themselves without being adequately resourced. Especially local women's organizations continue to be chronically underfunded, and the entire GBV sector receives less than 30% of the funding required for an adequate response. 3. Because resources are so limited, especially at country level, it is even more important that we collaborate across the triple nexus. Gender is an area of synergy with many opportunities for collaboration. That is why we are pleased to have had a chance to speak here and look forward to continuing to explore how to advance gender equality and the WPS agenda in shared peacekeeping and humanitarian contexts.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ramesh Rajasingam, for your kind message and your valuable inputs. And now we will move on to the panel discussion, and for that I would like to introduce our moderator, who is Vice Chair Ms. Shin Hae-soo of the UN Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. She has been working for over 40 years in the areas of women's human rights, and among others, she served as a commissioner of the National Human Rights Commission in Korea and member of the UN Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. With that, I turn the floor over to our moderator, and Madam Moderator, please take the floor.
Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is my great pleasure and honor to moderate this fourth session, Lessons Learned from the Asian Perspective on Women, Peace and Security. I've been wearing many hats. I've been putting my foot in UN human rights system, but all along my life has been civil society activism, also partly as academia. But I would like to give you some very brief background of this initiative by the Foreign Ministry of Korea. It has two roots, and one is the Korean experience of women, both North and South, during the colonial period, who were forcibly drafted as sex slaves, so military sexual slavery during wartime or during colonial period. That's one root that is behind this initiative. Korean women's movement has been all this experience of wartime sexual violence, and sexual slavery is an extreme form of violence against women during conflict. And another route is, of course, UN Security Council Resolution 1325, which I don't need to explain. And all women around the world welcomed this initiative, the first resolution on women, peace, and security adopted back in 2000. And with this, there has been advisory committee composed of about 20 people from the civil society that Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Korea invited to work together on this initiative. This initiative was launched in 2018, and then this annual conference started in 2019. So I think it shows an effort, genuine effort by the Korean Foreign Ministry on this agenda item. And I think two aspects from the recommendations or advice from the advisory committee have been incorporated into the program from the start. One is the survivor-centered approach, as well as Asian perspective, because we are located in Asian continent. And then another suggestion from the civil society is the youth session. You know, it is important to expand this awareness among the youth people so that they would actively participate in preventing, protection, and then relief, and recovery efforts of what Women, Peace, and Security agenda tries to achieve. So with this little background, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs formulated the first National Action Plan in 2014, which I was also participated as a member of civil society. At that time, 8 ministries were involved, and now it is expanded into 10 ministries and organizations within the government as well as the civil society. But from our perspective, from civil society perspective, it is far from satisfactory in terms of implementation. The formulation was initiated by Foreign Ministry, and then it was tossed over to the Ministry of Gender Equality and Family for implementation. And there is still a long way to go. So with this little background information, I'm very happy to have these 6 very distinguished panelists for today. I'm aware that we are a little bit behind the schedule, but I will not try to violate your right to food, which is a very important aspect of economic, social, and cultural rights covenant. But maybe since the time allocated for lunch time is 1.5 hours, so we can a little bit extend the morning session depending on the length. But each panelist will be asked to speak for 10 minutes. And I planned initially to pose question to each of the panelists, but maybe that question can be a little bit, shortened, or I might choose to ask questions to particular panelists, so in order to save time. So with that, I will first invite Ms. Esther Dingemans, who is now becoming a regular participant in this conference, and she's executive director of the Global Survivors Fund, which she, of course, will explain. And very happy to have you, Esther.
Thank you so much, Hesu, and it is really wonderful to see you again. And I'm indeed participating. I have the honor to participate in this conference for the 4th time in a row.
Thank you, first of all, to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Korea for organizing this conference for 4 times in a row. And I think what is important to mention, and you referred to it, Hyunsook, is the topics of the conference. They have evolved over the last 4 years. And let me just put up this slide that explains. Starting with conflict-related sexual violence, more focusing on the issue, towards a survivor-centered approach, towards women involvement in peace process, and now to an inclusive perspective on women, peace and security. And I think that journey somehow reflects also the journey that a survivor or a victim of conflict-related sexual violence goes through in her or in his life, from possibly a victim to a survivor, to an agent of change. And I say possibly because that's not always the case. That journey from pain to power can take a very, very, very long time. Definitely more than 4 years, sometimes generations. And there is something that I would like to discuss with you today, and that's the topic of reparations. And what is the role of reparations in reducing the time it takes to become from a victim, a survivor, and towards an agent of change. Because reparations has a really big role to play in that. I think reparation is in fact, well, just reparations, but especially the process of awarding reparations and claiming reparation and how that is done has a very big role in enabling survivors to contribute meaningfully, seriously to peace processes. Just very quickly on the Global Survivors Fund. This is an initiative that responds to a call of survivors of conflict-related sexual violence from around the world to prioritize reparations. What you see in this slide is a network, it's a very small fraction, in fact, of a network of victims and survivors, as they call themselves, to end wartime sexual violence. These women, and it also includes men, actually, in 2016 came together and they said, we need to prioritize reparations. Reparations is something that we all want, but we don't have. Reparations means for them recognition of the crimes, recognitions of the harm that they've suffered, but also rehabilitating support so that they can pick up or rebuild those lives that are often completely destroyed. So together with this network, we set up the Global Survivors Fund. And for me, this network is really what we're talking about here. It is truly embodiment of survivors as peacemakers. And many of the women and men that you see on this photo, but more broadly in the network, really actively contribute to peace processes in their own country. Now, very quickly, on what do we do at the Global Survivors Fund? We try to enhance access to reparations for victims of conflict-related sexual violence. And we try to do that through 3 ways. First of all, advocacy. Advocacy towards governments so that they take that responsibility to set up reparation programs, but then also offer technical support. If there's governments that are genuinely willing to start thinking about reparations and developing the policies, the Global Survivors Fund provides technical support to make sure that it is gender sensitive, that victims of sexual violence are really included, etc. But there's something else, and that is where governments are not ready and not forthcoming yet, the Global Survivors Fund supports grassroots civil society organizations to provide reparative measures. It's not reparations, because they need to come from a government, to victims of sexual violence, and it can take many different forms, from symbolic measures to financial support, livelihood support, access to education, etc., etc. And with that, I would really like to thank the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Korea, because they've been supporting this work since the very start in 2019. Now, our work is really informed by a global reparations study, and this is an initiative that looks at what is really that status of reparations in 20+ countries around the world, including in Asia. Conducted by and with our partners, which is 30 grassroots and a few international organizations around the world. And what I would like to do with you is to share a couple of findings of the study conducted in the Asia region, and that includes Bangladesh, Cambodia, Myanmar, Nepal, and Timor-Leste. You see it's part of a global initiative on this slide. And Here you see who are our partners in the Asia region, all fantastic grassroots organizations doing amazing work directly with survivors of conflict-related sexual violence. Just putting on their logos to honor their work, that has really impressed me. This is an example of one of the reports. They're really in-depth reports on reparations. What are the opportunities? What are the recommendations to the governments, to civil society, etc. So please go on our website if you have a chance. Some of the reports are already online. This is the one from Nepal, for example. Now, a couple of findings. What do we see in those 5 countries? And of course, they're very general, and we really would be not doing honor to the reality by simplifying like this. But there are some commonalities. And first of all, the very clear observation, repair is still pending. A lot needs to be done. There have been some important government initiatives, but the mindset really still need to change from looking at reparations as a right and an obligation of governments, a right of survivors, rather than a choice, a policy choice, which it is often now. Second, the initiatives that are there need to be really much more gender sensitive and inclusive of victims of conflict-related sexual violence. What are the harms, and why is repair, what is the repair still meant to do? I think what we see across the 5 countries is survivors living in extreme poverty, very often having medical and psychological scars that are unattended to, but also, and we're talking about a lot of survivors that are now of older age, children that are actually really excluded and stigmatized, and in some of the countries at least, and also therefore lacking or missing out on opportunities. And I think that's very important, the second generation, sometimes the third generation. What do survivors want? Well, it's different in every context, but often commemoralization, intergenerational dialogue, livelihood support, also financial support, because I really want to emphasize the extreme exclusion and poverty that many survivors are still facing, but then also programs for their children, for example, such as scholarships, programs, and vocational training. A second observation is really important, and I mentioned the partners before, is the fantastic work by civil society, grassroots organizations especially, that are doing much more than providing humanitarian assistance. They really truly focus on recognition and redressing the harm, so some form of reparative measures. And then there's a few examples of interesting collaboration between civil society organizations and the government. And just one example in Timor-Leste, where the Centro Nacional Chega body was created, which implements the recommendations of the Truth Commission. And that is really, and they've established a working group on reparations, and that's an excellent example of potential collaboration between civil society lending their expertise and government to enhance reparations. Third observation, and it really speaks to the topic of this, conference, is that survivors are not really seriously taking part in a dialogue around reparations. In fact, most of them have actually never had a chance to talk about what reparations should look like for them, let alone the policies, the procedures, etc., of getting them. And that's a real issue. On a positive side, there's momentum. It's not too late. There are possibilities for state-led reparation programs in all of these 5 countries, actually, and that's an opportunity. So what needs to be done to embark on that opportunity? I think the very first thing is there's no time to wait. Like I said, many survivors are of older age. They're in extremely difficult conditions, so there needs to be urgent measures to redress those harms. What I want to say there is that the process of how that is being done is really, really important. It is not just about the measures, but it is about how are they being delivered. Reparations is not about aid delivery, it's not a top-down approach. It's really survivors claiming that right to reparations and participating in that process. At the Global Survivors Fund, we use a model which is called co-creation for reparations, but meaning that all of the measures are really developed, defined, monitored from A to Z with survivors. And what is very interesting, our first impact reports are really showing with data, that process of co-creation has reparative value in itself. And that's really what is lacking at the moment, is survivors meaningfully participating in reparation processes. There is momentum for governments, that I said, to set up domestic reparation programs, and I really think those interim measures can inform that process. So learning from the civil society organizations, the work on the ground, what works well, and informing that into official government policy. And that is where I'd like to end, because that is then ultimately where we arrive. If survivors have access to reparation, if they are genuinely participating in this process, then it is time, and then they are ready to really become agents of change and influence the inclusive peace processes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Esther, for your very informative as well as very stimulating presentation. I'm happy to hear that Korean government is contributing to the Global Survivors Fund. And another pillar of this Foreign Ministry's initiative of action with women and peace is, one is this annual conference, and then the other is ODA to women who experience conflict. So far, Korean ODA has been mostly bilateral to the government of the recipient countries, or usually through the international organizations like especially UNDP, UNFPA, UN Women, etc. And the advisory committee has been suggesting to our foreign ministry that maybe to empower women, there should be a third channel to really directly support women on the ground or women's movement organizations. And we just heard from the keynote speaker for this session one that women needs more resources, which is lacking on the ground. So that goes into the right direction. I think Korean government would also find a way to support directly for women survivors of conflict violence, and then women's organizations who have been trying to help, as well as the community who is very much important in supporting the survivors and overcoming the stigma and isolation that the victims suffer. Second panelist, happy to have Ms. Visakha Damasdasa from Sri Lanka. I will not introduce any more in detail. You can all check in your program because of time constraints. She preferred to be asked question rather than preparing a presentation. So I'll ask a question. You know, Sri Lanka is a country with long conflicts, and they recently also experienced chaotic situation. Please let us know how your work on women, peace and security related activities started, how it was expanded to other parts of Asia, what are the successes and challenges as you see it in your long involvement into the issue.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And thank you for the Foreign Ministry of Korea for giving me this opportunity to be in this esteemed panel and also to participate in this conference. At the outset, I must thank the Ministry of Foreign Affairs Korea especially for bringing in the Afghanistan issue, because of the fact we can't get Ukrainian war to overshadow Afghanistan, especially because of the fact that today you deprive education for a girl for a century, the effects will be there because of the fact we become mothers, and any child, whether it's a girl or a boy, is molded by the mother for 5 years at least, and definitely longer. So women's education is extremely important. I hope Taliban understand if they really want a future for their country. Having said that, what women, peace, and security agenda. We heard a lot today, and I think the keynote speaker in our session got it very right. It's not necessarily only violence against women. Women want to decide of the foreign policy of the country. They want to decide of the economy and also of the defense. For women, domestically, we close the doors in the evening. Why do we close our doors? Why do we lock our doors? Because we are concerned about our security. But if we are hungry, we don't have food inside the house, does only closing the doors matter? That's exactly women, peace, and security agenda. You take your priorities the way it is. You have the food, the women have to be secured. Yes, the country's security is utmost important, not only for the men, but for the women as well. So don't underestimate our ability to take very important security decisions. 22 years, people know it. From morning we are listening, yes, women, women, women. But where are the women? The women are not there because they think we cannot take important security decisions. We can. We can. And that is what the world have to understand. The day that the world understands that we can, the change will start. I wanted to tell this, because especially Korea is going to be in the Security Council, and we do need that change. We do need that change. And also, why Asia matters? Because of the sheer population. Population does matter. And also the economy, the fastest growing economies in the world in Asia. South Asia, Asia together, the fastest growing economies in the world. So we do matter in the world, our decisions do matter, and if we can collectively take that path to hear the voices of the women, it's not, yes ma'am, hunger is important, we need to have the food, but women's voices, giving time, is also equally important. And also, I want to tell, yes, Sri Lanka is experiencing, we have had conflicts, Sri Lanka is experiencing very difficult economic situation right now because as a population, we have taken wrong decisions of appointing people who are not fit to lead our country. Of course, we have had one woman, the first in the world to head our country, who had very good economical policies, and a woman president, but since late, for the past 20 long years, we, the Sri Lankans, have appointed people, we elected people who are not fit to be our leaders. And that's where Sri Lanka is right now, but we know that we can come out of that. And we are trying, ma'am. We are trying to come out, and we will. And also, while wishing North Korea all the success for being in Security Council, we will work and walk with you together to see that very special change is effected, to not only hear the voice of the women, but to accept and include women in very important security decisions. We need to be there. We need to be there when the war and peace is discussed, not necessarily only on sexual violence. I mean, if we are there, because sexual violence in conflict comes because there are conflicts. So if the conflicts are prevented, then we don't have to speak about sexual violence in conflict. So please include women, and I think Korea will take the lead in the world to include women in very important security decisions. And also to come back, to walk the talk, you need money. Yes, that's why, thank you ma'am, what you told. Please fund the women's organization. It's important to fund women's organization. Big funding always say they can't give small funding to women's organization because they have a lot of paperwork to do. Because a woman can do with $100 much more than a big organization can do with $1 million. So think about that. What you want. If you want results, then give the money to women. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We cannot emphasize more the need for women to participate. There was a very interesting episode within our National Assembly in Korea. You know, the Standing Parliamentary Committee on Defense, the Defense Committee, is dominated by men. And then there was first attempt by a woman parliamentarian to be on the Defense Committee. And people were questioning, men were questioning, what do you know about defense? She proudly said, I send my sons to the army. Yeah? But anyway, we are all concerned about the future of our country. So, and I believe together with you that women can do anything, and sometimes, or most of the times, better than men. Yeah? Okay, so with that, we go to next panelist, who is Professor Miriam Coronel Ferreira, yeah? Who has also extensive experience on women, peace, and security issue. So the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Madame Shin. I would have preferred that you ask me a question, but yesterday the Secretariat asked me to send over a presentation to help our hardworking interpreters, so this will only be partially extemporaneous. First,
I might ask you a question after your short presentation.
Yeah? I will welcome the question. Let me say that I'm very pleased to be back here in Seoul after 18 years. 18 years ago, I lived here for 1 year as a visiting professor at Hankook and Sogang universities. And at that time, there was no woman political science professor in any university here in South Korea. And I'm pleased that much has happened ever since. Of course, there's still a long way to go. But if there's really one thing that I remember about Korea and know about Korea until today is that I love the food. The diversity of the food from one province to another is simply amazing. Now, talking about food, in the Philippines, we have this delicious rice cake that we call the bibingka. What makes it special is that you cook it with heat at the bottom, traditionally on a flat clay using charcoal, and then you put a round metal plate on top of the pan, also filled with charcoal. This way, you cook the thick pancake with heat at the bottom and heat at the top. Social movements in the Philippines have learned that effective advocacy is like cooking a bibingka. You need heat from below to catalyze the cooking, but you also need the heat from above to ensure that you have a well-cooked bibingka, including the salted eggs and the slab of white cheese made from Carabao milk that you put on top to make the cake even more delicious. Then, when it's done, you garnish the cake with butter and a sprinkling of shredded coconut. And that's when you're ready to celebrate and eat your cake. This approach is what we have called in our country the bibingka strategy. The Philippines became the first country in Asia to launch a national action plan on UN Security Council Resolution 1325 in 2010 using this strategy. The first Philippine NAP, National Action Plan, was initiated by 3 women from civil society, including myself, who then invited other organizations from 3 social movements, peace, human rights, and women's movements, and connected with 2 national government agencies, the Office of the Presidential Advisor on the Peace Process, and yes, we have one, and what is now called the Philippine Commission on Women. When the executive order from the Office of the President was taking too long to come out, we women decided to move ahead with the national consultation process and produce the draft. The draft was then submitted to the government, who then adopted it as its national action plan. And women in government and civil society have been very active as well in its implementation. That bibingka strategy has worked well in various countries, various contexts in Asia, which now likewise have a national action plan on women, peace, and security. The importance of that bottom-to-top and top-to-bottom approach works not only in implementing the plan, not only in drafting the plan, but also in implementing it. As Ruby Khalifa, country representative of the Asian Muslim Action Network in Indonesia, said, only within a democratic space can the implementation of women, peace and security agenda be carried out in a transparent and accountable way. Thus, this is our first lesson learned from our experience. To get there, use the Bibingka strategy to ensure inclusive processes, outcomes, as well as implementation. Other countries in Asia have adopted NAPs with varying degrees of state and civil society cooperation. Nepal in 2011, Australia in 2012, Korea and Indonesia in 2014, and in 2015, we have Japan, Afghanistan, under the old arrangement in Afghanistan, and New Zealand, Timor-Leste in 2016. Now, while we applaud that these countries have actually moved ahead with 1325 NAPs, the fact is not enough countries in Asia are actually doing so. And in the world, actually, only 50% or 54 UN member states have NAPs, and 1/3 of these have actually expired. There are only 9 countries in Asia with comprehensive NAPs, although, in fact, others do have developed programs for specific elements of UN Security Resolution 1325, for example, on peacekeeping or gender-based violence, but not all its components, all the components, the comprehensive components that the 1325 provides for us: protection, promotion, prevention, peace building, and recovery. So a lot still has to be done to get more countries to use that kind of comprehensive framework for planning as well as program development. Now, just as the Bibingka requires heat going down, what we see in recent years are attempts to localize. Indeed, to be entrenched and effective as a framework, program, and policy, we need several layers of the Bibingka. Even within the same country, addressing women's peace and security needs and promoting their active participation have varied contexts. Conflict sources in communities differ. In localities where you have an active war going on, the blatant physical security needs of the women are of foremost importance. In other areas where you have frequent environmental disasters, often as a result of damaging human activities like logging and mining, then these issues at the community level come to the fore. And the fact is there are many local women's organizations as well as women-led organizations that are actually mobilizing for peace and addressing all of these developments that they confront in their community, the most recent of which, of course, was the COVID-19 pandemic. Within the broader neighborhood, now at the regional level, the push must come as well. Finally, as we heard from our speakers, from keynote speakers from Indonesia and Cambodia, we find regional action plans have taken shape. The ASEAN Regional Action Plan that was just launched this month in Cambodia comes in the heels of other regional action plans as we find in the Pacific Islands Forum, the ECOWAS, or the Economic Community of West African States, and the Arab League. Thus, our second lesson learned about advancing 1325 is that efforts and initiatives need to be layered and contextualized. And then there has to be synergy. There has to be that push and pull within and across the geographic layers, even as each layer has to be responsive to its own context. Since there is no regional organization for Northeast Asia and other parts, it might help to consider expanding the ASEAN regional NAP to cover ASEAN partners through the various ASEAN Plus mechanisms, such as the ASEAN Regional Forum. Now, going on to our third lesson, I will stress what I will stress now is very simple. It can be expressed with the hashtag WIW. WIW stands for Women Inspiring Women. This is precisely what we realize in our work for peace, working both with men and women in different levels. When women see other women doing peace-building work, leading teams, accomplishing the goals, the dominant narrative that prevents women from taking on more roles in the public sphere is disrupted. You know, narratives like, oh, women are not strong enough to address these issues. Oh, they are too emotional to be rational. Now, that's the kind of narratives that we are disrupting precisely because we are showing the world what we can do. In 2014, the Philippine government and the More Islamic Liberation Front signed the Comprehensive Agreement on the Bangsamoro, which granted meaningful autonomy in parts of Mindanao where the Bangsamoro, the Islamic population, indigenous communities live. The government panel, which I chaired, had 50% female on the team by the time we signed the agreement. This is very unique in the rest of the world. Significant other members of our delegation were very young, talented women. We showed that women can lead such a difficult process and that with good partnership with men and women, we can produce better results. Because at the end of the day, WPS agenda is about partnership and gender equality. As the 2020 assessment on WPS in the Asia-Pacific recommended, more men need to become WPS champions of gender inclusion. More men need to bring to the fore the gender dimensions of peace and security issues, mainstream that in policy analysis, and show how gender inequality actually contributes to the conflict drivers, to the drivers of the conflict, if not a source of the conflict itself. So I believe that we have enough inspired women to inspire not only other women, but also men, so that we are able to bring these strong partnerships that will transform the structures and norms that perpetuate gender inequality and build strong gender-sensitive and gender-responsive institutional approaches for preventing and responding to conflict. Thank you very much. Hamsa Kamida.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Miriam, for introducing this very interesting Bibinka strategy. Yeah. I'm very concerned about time. I'm trying to trying to finish this first session by 12:45, I promise. And it's not fair for the remaining 3 panelists to shorten your presentation, but I have to ask you, 7 or 8 minutes, and then see whether we have a few minutes for me to ask questions, which I think would like to. But next we'll have Lilian Fan, who is from Asia Pacific Refugee Rights Network. And then I believe that you work on Rohingya working group, and you are based in Kuala Lumpur as well as Aceh. Yeah? So, please.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Thank you very much for, first of all, to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for this kind invitation to participate in this conference, and also to all of you who are sharing this panel with me, for sharing your lessons and your experiences with all of us. And I hope to contribute a little bit to this discussion. I think the first thing that I will say is, when we're talking about the issue of Rohingya refugees, and if we're trying to learn from approaches, I will have to say very clearly that our approaches have failed, both regionally and globally. And I want to put that on the table first, because if we don't admit that as an international community, I don't think we can have a discussion about where we go from here. I will talk about the Rohingya because it's the majority of my work. I don't work only on Rohingya refugees, I work on all refugees. But the Rohingya issue is one which is, number one, I think the most urgent to our region, because it's the one with the least possibility of finding solutions at this point. And Rohingya refugees continue to be the most marginalized, not only the most persecuted persons in the world, but actually the most marginalized refugees in the world as well, for many reasons. But there are two main points that I'd like to make in my presentation today. The first is that we do have collective responsibility for actually the failure of coming to an approach that works, and therefore a shared responsibility in trying to find new ways and find new strategies of approaching the Rohingya issue. And secondly, that just as Mr. Ramesh mentioned earlier, that we can't have only protection, that protection is not enough, I also think that we can't have empowerment of women without protection. And I think specifically legal protection, and in the case of the Rohingya, legal documentation. Because if we don't talk about legal documentation and legal status, and the root cause, of course, of citizenship of the Rohingya back in Myanmar, then we will never be able to get to the root cause of this problem. The Rohingya refugee crisis obviously stems from the problem of statelessness of the Rohingya people in Myanmar. This, of course, is a very complex problem in which many stakeholders are involved, and there's a long history, but it's become even more complicated because of the recent events in Myanmar, given the military coup and the continued armed conflict in Myanmar between the Arakan army and the Myanmar military as well. We've seen waves of dispossession, displacement, and denial of human rights of Rohingya people in Myanmar, and even displacement inside Myanmar still remains for the Rohingya. At least 130,000 Rohingya remain displaced, internally displaced within camps. There's very limited freedom of movement. In fact, restrictions on movement still remain. Systematic discrimination, including restrictions on family life, which still exist. Currently, restrictions on the ability to marry, ability to travel, and ability to even own land. There's, of course, been wide coverage of the widespread violence against Rohingya, and I think we have to also be quite accurate in the way we describe it, because there are, of course, definitions that have been, or recognition of genocide by some states, but even before the massive violence, you've had very structural violence, and I think we need to look at this violence in both ways, that you've had an entire structure of violence that's been going on for a very long time, and then you've had these spikes in violence which have led to mass atrocities, including to genocide. So we have to look at, we have to understand the nature of violence that has been taking place against the Rohingya. And if you talk about women, of course, there has been a lot of sexual violence, but the violence is not only sexual violence as well. That all this structural violence has really impacted the lives of women, the options that women have in their lives, the ability of even basic mobility, the lack of access to very basic education even, and the fact that, very sadly, the vast majority of Rohingya women, not only Rohingya refugees, but Rohingya women even in Myanmar, are largely illiterate until today. So I think we have to look at this as a very comprehensive problem, and the impacts are extremely far-reaching. We, of course, then have in Bangladesh close to 1 million Rohingya refugees who have been seeking refuge across the border in Bangladesh, actually for many decades, but of course the latest influx was in 2017, 2018, and the government of Bangladesh was very generous in allowing access to territory and granting basically shelter in the camps, but the conditions there have also been very untenable for long term, and the displacement in those camps is getting very protracted. There's also extremely limited access to education, healthcare, and still a lack of legal protection and documentation even there. In Southeast Asia, Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, but also in India, actually, in South Asia, you have a situation where Rohingya refugees also have no legal status, and in fact are very often subjected to arrest and detention and prolonged detention because of the difficulty of deporting refugees, Rohingya refugees to Myanmar, because Myanmar doesn't accept them. So you have ended up, what we see actually is a situation across the region where you have thousands of Rohingya refugees, tens of thousands of Rohingya refugees in detention for indefinite periods of time, with very little access to independent agencies, whether it's UNHCR or ICRC, or other organizations who could provide services within those detention centers. And you've even also had some forcible cases, I wouldn't say large scale, but cases of forcible deportation by some countries. And one of the cases actually was a separation. It was a woman who was deported back to Myanmar, actually from India. So these things are happening. And countries who are hosting Rohingya refugees don't feel that they are well supported. They don't feel they have the resources to take in large numbers and increasing numbers of refugees either. So we're really in a situation where really nothing is working. Nothing is really working. Women, of course, I think we've heard these stories, there are a lot of stories about how there's a very high incidence of child marriage amongst Rohingya, how Rohingya women are limited by, in movement and education, even by their own communities. I think we need to understand also that it's not just a cultural issue, that these are practices that have developed because of this protracted violence against Rohingya people, and the fact that Rohingya have developed negative coping mechanisms to deal with that violence. So I think until we get to the root of the problem, we're going to see more and more structural violence against women, and including perpetrations of violence and more restrictions by their own communities, by the Rohingya community themselves. So it's a vicious cycle. So where do we look, I think, if there is a way of changing an approach, where do we even start looking at that? I think that we have to start with looking at some of the legal issues, really some of the legal documentation and legal protection in the region. That is not something that is easy to do with a wide diversity of countries where there's so much disagreement and actually a real unwillingness. I mean, currently, right now, there are at least 2 boats in the Andaman Sea with Rohingya survivors which are in deep distress, and there's not a single country that wants to take them. And this happens almost every year. This year it's worse. We're seeing similar numbers to what we saw in 2015, but this is going to happen over and over again. So I think that number one, we really need to address this at a regional level. It cannot be one country trying to be the hero. Bangladesh has done a tremendous job, but it's not enough, and it will never be enough for one country to try to take on, the responsibility themselves. It has to be a regional approach. But number two, also, we have to get away from the stigma of talking about the Rohingya. I think even in ASEAN now, we still don't say the word Rohingya very often. We still say Muslims in Rakhine State. We still skirt around the issue. And I think until we're actually brave enough to put this issue on the table and really, not for political reasons, but really for humanitarian reasons and really for reasons of caring about the well-being of human beings who are in this, number one, in the world, but number two, in our regions, and number three, because of the impact and the implications of not doing so are so great. We will have generations and generations of people who are absolutely marginalized from any kind of society, whether it's in Myanmar, in Bangladesh, in Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia, or elsewhere. And that's just a recipe for disaster and a recipe for instability in the future. And I do believe that more governments are starting to see this. Definitely the Malaysian government is starting to listen to these issues, as is Indonesia, but we really do need more honest dialogue about these issues. There is a little bit of, I wouldn't say it's a light of sort of ray of hope at this point, but I do think some interesting approaches have emerged. There are approaches now in Malaysia for, I'm basically the secretariat, I head the secretariat of an all-party parliamentary group, so there's a bipartisan effort, and it really came from MPs. It wasn't something which civil society proposed to parliamentarians. It was MPs from very different political parties coming together to say, we don't have a policy on refugees, but we need to discuss how we get to developing one. Yep. So that's something that's quite interesting as well. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much for showing us the seriousness and the magnitude of the human rights situation of Rohingya people. Thank you. Next, we'll have Hnin She Zin Hlaing from Myanmar. I've experience of working with the Gender Equality Network. Back in 2013, I think, I was invited to train the Myanmar government officials regarding legislation on violence against women at the time, which of course couldn't succeed. And now that was good old days, you know, from today's perspective. So you have the floor.
Thank you so much for giving me such a wonderful opportunity. During the time, given the time constraint, I'd like to focus on the current situation of my country. In Myanmar, after almost a decade of making stride in the WPS advancement, when there is an illegal regime trying to overthrow the civilian government through a failed coup, all the gains women peace builders have made are brought under massive threats. After the coup staged by the military, the WPS found itself in disarray throughout the country. The peace component disappeared from political discussion, and insecurity emerged in every aspect of people's daily lives. We have to distribute equally our attention and efforts in implementing the WPS framework from participation pillar and protection to prevention. Protection needs for women are at the highest level of threats when the junta commits their horrendous atrocities. Women human rights violation, conflict-related sexual violence as a weapon of war, targeting women human rights defenders and peace activists, including kidnapping children or killing them or holding them hostages. Women bear the burden of the tragic consequences of this crisis in Myanmar. It is despicable that the military junta and the security forces have been enjoying the impunity for such a long time. We have witnessed unprecedented levels of women's and LGBTIQ+ participation in the Myanmar peaceful protests. From the onset of the coup d'etat, women peace builders of Myanmar participated in public political decision-making process by denouncing the coup and pressing for the full and complete return of power to the civilian government. Women are participating at a greater personal cost and risks of being exposed to physical violence and sexual violence by regime security forces. This is where I like to highlight the global evidence demonstrating a strong connection between the participation and protection within the WPS framework. Gender-based violence and the lack of protection have been identified as two of the chief barriers to women's mobility, participation in public space, and stifling their aspiration to enter politics and public affairs. When fellow women human rights defenders endure sexual violence, the signal to wider public is that if you conduct such an activity, the same fate could befall on you. Protection needs for women peace builders are extremely high as the junta continues to carry out arrests. As of December 13, a total of 16,549 have been arrested, and of which female accounts for 3,465 and 23 LGBTIQ+ individuals. The total fidelity figure sits at 2,578, and of which females 316. Women were tortured to death during the interrogation process. Their physical situation is dire, as they are detained in men's block with limited number of toilets and little or no access to feminine hygiene products. The CRSV cases are being recorded in interrogation and detention sites. We witnessed testimony from friends and family members of the survivors. The current protection status is in a state of emergency as with Myanmar public infrastructure being collapsed. Existing women groups and networks are sparing no efforts to provide services as much as the need arises. Women groups are conducting CRSV-related researches, and based on the finding, SGVB and CRSV prevention and protection frameworks and SOPs to respond better to the growing incidence of sexual violence in conflict. In doing so, I like to highlight the feminist organizations and women's rights organizations that are that play a key role in providing services for the survivors of violence. The donors have to value and appreciate the local actors, recognizing that complex challenges evolve and change over time, and that successful solution must be able to adapt and respond to those changes. The next one is prevention. Long-term strategies of conflict prevention are being deliberated at Women Peace Builder of Myanmar, recognize that the root causes of conflict lie in the unresolved issue of long-term ethnic, gender, and social grievances. There is a need for system change. To help address the conflict we are in right now, it is important to tackle the root causes of the conflict, not to only address the symptoms of our crisis. Amidst the crisis, women leaders and women groups are strategically positioning themselves to take up a mediation role and conflict resolution duties. Participation in inclusive and representative interim political bodies that have a common vision to build a just and equitable Myanmar is one of the ways to ensure that future generation of Myanmar women and girls will not suffer the pain of wars and violent conflicts. Finally, relief and recovery. Women's groups continue to risk their life and security to bring relief and humanitarian assistance to the affected communities in the form of medicine, non-food items, food, shuttling messages, mobilizing humanitarian responses, and alerting one another on rising needs. Allow me to conclude. In these darkest hours, Myanmar's women's organization network needs international assistance and support now more than ever to localize women peace and security concerns. In accordance with the international framework to advance the WPS agenda is operationalization and localization. The supporters and champions must do things hand in hand with national and local women's organizations. We ask the countries who support the operationalization of the WPS agenda worldwide to develop a comprehensive understanding of the local context, including social, economic, and political dynamics at play, and as well as the needs and priorities of the local communities. When the local organization opting to not register under the junta or to work in secrecy, be respectful of their choice. This is also part of their risk management, given their local context. Women know, and yes, they definitely do. They have the innate ability to understand the threats looming on the horizon, and they have the agency to devise the solution that are most appropriate to any given conflict context. This is how we start treating women as agents of change, not as passive victims, which is the core value of the WPS agenda. With that, I thank you for this space.
Thank you very much, Henin. It is heartbreaking that my several Myanmar friends are hiding again. Thank you for giving us updates, as well as your plea for international assistance. Yeah. Now we go to our final panelist, Mr. James Hinan, who is the head of the Office of High Commissioner for Human Rights in Seoul. This is the first time that we include the North Korean human rights issue into this international conference. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Haesu, and I'm very honored to be with such an incredible group of human rights defenders. I think after 22 years, we have a pretty good idea about what 1325 is all about, and obviously there's been so much work done on the ground to unpack it, and we've heard a lot of the fantastic examples here today. The High Commissioner, my boss, he made the clear links between human rights and the WPS agenda. Just in the interest of time, I'll just focus on what our office is focused on, which is DPRK. Our office is focused on monitoring and reporting on the human rights situation in the DPRK, as well as finding pathways to accountability. We do this in a number of ways, but the essential way is we continue to interview escapees from DPRK. We've done this for many years. But now, due to the COVID restrictions inside or around the DPRK, there have been very few escapees arriving here in the Republic of Korea. Most of the escapees who we're seeing now have already spent some years in transit in China or in Russia. But before the COVID pandemic, really hit in 2020, let's say, the majority of the North Koreans that we interviewed were women. In fact, I think it was up to about 80% were women. The reasons for this are many women have relatively more freedom than men to engage in private market activity in the DPRK, including near the border with China. Women have become the primary breadwinners for many households in the DPRK because while male members are generally confined to state-allocated jobs, which really don't pay much. However, the struggle to eke out an existence remains extreme for women and their families, causing many women to cross the border, exposing themselves, as we heard from Ambassador Lee Shin-hwa, to trafficking, into forced marriages, and then also the threat of torture and ill treatment should they be returned to the DPRK. We try to pay more attention also to the women who are particularly vulnerable to human rights violations in the DPRK, women including pregnant and lactating women in rural areas, those with the lower songbun, the lower sort of official status within the society in North Korea, women in detention, women with disabilities, and of course older women, which is becoming much more of a focus. The prolonged border closure has, we think, led to serious economic and social concerns in DPRK, particularly the worsening food situation, the health conditions, including the depletion of vaccines, not just COVID vaccines, but protection against neonatal tetanus, also trying to tackle one of the highest rates of tuberculosis in the world. My colleagues in the UN country team are outside the country. They're based in Bangkok at the moment, and it's essential that UN and other humanitarian agencies be able to return to the DPRK as soon as possible to provide this support. But of course, what we're dealing with is a country where there is severe oppression of just basic civil and political rights. North Koreans are denied their democratic voice. They're denied pretty well all means to shape a government that serves their needs and aspirations and promotes and protects their human rights. One manifestation of this is the glaring absence of women in government in the DPRK, including at the highest decision-making bodies of the Central Committee of the Workers' Party, the Politburo, and the Cabinet. This places, I think, a particular onus on us in the international community to listen and amplify the voices of North Korean women outside the country, with a focus on efforts to elevate these voices of women. In the context of the Republic of Korea, there must also be some self-reflection on the extent to which gender balance is actively secured in discussions and forums and intergovernmental meetings. I mean, it's a classic WPS issue, the fact that women need to be involved, much more involved, in the discussions about what's going on in North Korea. Our office is currently increasing its outreach to North Koreans in the community here. I think there's about 33,000 North Koreans here in South Korea. We want to hear from them their views. Also, again, continuing this approach of not treating people as passive recipients of rights, but wanting to hear what they want, particularly around issues of accountability. And that's a very, very interesting exercise. We will be publishing on it next year at some point. But the idea of people who have been subjected to some of the worst human rights violations in the world today, asking them what do they want? Do they want someone up before a court, or do they want memorialization, or do they just want to know the truth? For those dealing with enforced disappearance, many of them just want to know where their loved ones are, or where their remains are, and when they passed away. This is all part of, also an effort to provide awareness raising for North Koreans, particularly North Korean women, awareness raising on human rights. If you come from North Korea, you've probably got the lowest knowledge of human rights of anyone in the world. And then you turn up here and you get people like me turning up saying, well, let's talk about your rights. It's impossible to have that discussion if the person doesn't have an idea of the concept of human rights or accountability. In fact, one of the North Koreans we met the other week said what happened in South Korea with President Park Geun-hye was very broadly disseminated in North Korea, but it had the opposite effect of what the regime wanted. It showed that even the most highest levels are subject to accountability. So these opportunities to raise awareness have to be pursued. We do it with women-led organisations such as Mulmancho and Korea Future and Dongilmon, Citizens Alliance. And that's really a focus of our work for next year. I'll just finish by saying, the office, we support efforts for a peaceful resolution of the conflict on the Korean Peninsula. We understand the inter-Korean relations and denuclearization are a priority, but placing human rights at the core of international diplomacy with the DPRK from the outset is also centrally important, and part of our role is to make sure that the voice of human rights and the voice of women is heard in that conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, James. I initially prepared questions to each of the 6 panelists, but I regret that there is no time. And instead, I just sum up with 3 points that I think we found. The first point is, whether it's a Rohingya issue or whether it's a Sri Lankan situation or situation in Myanmar, wherever, we need regional cooperation among the states, among the civil society, among all the stakeholders in this region. And for that, for example, the Office of High Commissioner for Human Rights in Seoul needs to work not only with North Korea defectors or South Korean government, but also should deal with the Chinese government as well as other government in the region and try to help the situation in North Korea. We all heard, how this particular situation, a particular country's situation has now spread out. So we need more than ever regional cooperation, especially because Asia doesn't have any regional human rights mechanism. There is ASEAN mechanism, which is somewhat weak, not strong enough. And then there was a suggestion that it should be expanded into ASEAN Plus. We have ASEAN Plus 3, including China, Japan, and Korea. But of course, sometimes it's very difficult. And then we need to include many more countries. The second point I found out is we need to provide support to women on the ground, the women victims and survivors, as well as women's organizations, to empower them to provide immediate needs, but also long-term needs. That is always the most urgent thing that we should do, which Esther showed. And with that kind of support, I think that would really contribute to the empower of women who then can regain the dignity and normal life, hopefully. The third point is we should not stop there. There is a great need that women should participate equally and fully to the decision-making level. Not only on women, peace and security issue, but on all matters of one's own country, as well as in the region, as well as around the world. The afternoon session, there will be a focus on Afghanistan. But of course, we should not forget what's happening in Iran now. And the struggle that Iranian women and people are going through. So hopefully in the next year's conference, or even during from today and then until next year's conference, we should keep our eyes and then think about how we can help and connect and build solidarity with those people who are struggling, and especially women in many parts of Asia. And with this, regrettably, I think we need to close. And thank you very much for all 6 panelists who gave their outstanding presentations and updated us. Thank you very much.
Thank you once again for our moderator as well and our 6 panelists. Please give them another big round of applause as they return back to their seats. Thank you. And now, ladies and gentlemen, this concludes our first session, the lessons learned from the Asian approach to women, peace, and security. Thank you for a lively session. And thank you to our audience who are watching online through our YouTube channel as well. We will resume with session 2. And as you've heard from our moderator, our session 2 will be on Afghanistan. Let the voices be heard. We'll resume at 2 p.m. after lunchtime. So please do enjoy lunch, and we will see you back here at 2 p.m. Thank you very much.